So we'll get started with this morning's panel, which is titled From Here to There and There to Here, Examining Global Project Development. This panel is comprised of four individuals, and we're going to, unlike yesterday, they will be giving presentations, followed by a short Q&A. I'm going to introduce our moderator this morning, and he will then introduce his presenters. With us moderating this morning is Thomas Suffield, Director of Gavilon Group, LLC. Mr. Suffield joined Gavilon in December 2009 to help start their biomass business with Gavilon's Renewables Energy Group. Gavilon, if you don't know, is an Omaha, Nebraska-based commodity firm active in the energy sector and ranks as the third largest agricultural-based commodity firm behind Cargill and ADM. Gavilon provides much-needed capital to the biomass supply business and the resulting commodity offtake for biomass power, pellets, and derivatives thereof. Gavilon's credit support for biomass projects facilitates capital raising and project finance throughout the biomass infrastructure sector. Prior to Gavilon, Thomas founded Cedar Capital, LLC, and subsequently sold a portion of that company to Gavilon. Cedar Capital was active in providing development and financing expertise for renewable energy opportunities with a focus on biomass power and the pellet businesses. Cedar Capital and its principal, Thomas, developed and financed biomass power projects and the supporting biomass feedstock. As we've heard from Hannah Lean, it's tough to develop these projects without developing the feedstock supply as well and get them financed. Thomas has extensive experience in mergers and acquisitions throughout the energy value chain, and I think he's really the ideal person to moderate this morning's panel. Please join me in welcoming Thomas Suffield.
Thank you, Tom. And as our four speakers are joining me at the podium, I wanted to thank you, Tom. I think the seminar has really been going well, the entire conference these few days already. I had the pleasure of attending last year, and I'd just like to give you a quick round of applause because I think everything's been going very seamlessly. Thank you. All right, once again, thank you all for joining us early this morning. As Tom introduced me, I do have some experience and background in this biomass space, and what we're going to focus on this morning is continue with our keynote speaker, looking at the international perspective, the idea that what a lot of y'all are already doing here in the U.S. or in your country of origin can be exported, can be taken to a foreign land, shall we say, because the expertise that you have is quite oftentimes needed, whether it's on the feedstock arena, the biomass supply side, or offtake, et cetera. I know Gavilon, we've had the pleasure of doing the first index-based trade into Europe based on the Argus index. And so as we see biomass, in this case that was a pellet transaction, biomass wood pellets, as we see this biomass becoming more of a commodity, and I think that's been a buzzword we've seen throughout the conference, we're going to continue to see more opportunities as we've seen natural gas and electricity, the more traditional energy sources evolve. I think we're seeing this happen in renewables and most specifically with biomass. So I'm very pleased to have a strong group of speakers with us this morning, all with very strong project development and international experience. And so we're just going to jump in. First to the lectern will be Simon Parker. He comes to us as the CEO of DP Cleantech Holdings Limited. He spends his time between Beijing and Denmark, so he's going to have a unique and international flair for us. His background includes DP Cleantech's unique technology. It's based on both a high pressure and high temperature system that was originally developed in Denmark and continues to be a technology that gets refined, upgraded, and broadened and applied to a range of fuels in order to burn those more efficiently. He also oversaw 3 acquisitions in the organic growth to grow the revenues to a 5 times original level in just 3 years. So he's seen a lot of growth in the international arena, and it has extended those operations even more so within the international footprint. Prior to DP Cleantech, he was the CEO of Dragon Power Group, managing over 25 separate biomass power plants, generating over 500 megawatts or representing over 500 megawatts of capacity. Also managing a substantial pressure part manufacturing company in China. So we look forward to hearing from Simon. He spent quite a bit of time in the Asia Pacific region for several years, began his career as a lawyer out of the UK, so no doubt his diversified background is going to be beneficial to us this morning. Please join me in welcoming Simon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your time. The one comment that Tom didn't make in the introduction of myself, I spent actually 20 years in the finance industry. And I took, in the last 3 years, I moved down to biomass, so it's quite unusual. I've spent 20 years trying to get out of finance, and now I find myself at a panel speaking about funding of projects. I'd like to spend probably most of my time, if I can, talking to you about the development of our company and how we came about, because I think it is going to be an interesting exercise or an interesting explanation as to how you can develop an industry from nothing to a reasonably successful and certainly reasonably well-scaled industry, using China as the example, and then how we're taking that model, hopefully, to other markets, whether it be India, Eastern Europe increasingly, potentially Latin America and other markets. So I'll give you a little bit of an explanation about the origins and the roots of DP Cleantech. It's fair to say that we are the result of a huge Chinese experiment. If you go back to 2005, there was a delegation of senior Chinese government officials who went to Northern Europe, to Scandinavia, and saw a biomass-to-power plant in operation, burning wheat straw. And having seen this, they decided this was an industry that China needed. And I would also characterize, this is the kind of thing that only can really be done in China, but I think a great deal of lessons that have been learned from it can be applied in other markets. So the Chinese did what only they could do. They said, we need this industry. So how do you actually make an industry happen? In China, the first thing you do is you make a very big and a bold statement. So one of the senior government officials came out and said, China needs this industry, and they put a target of 30 gigawatts of power to be generated from annual crop residue in China by 2020. So it gave itself a 15-year time frame to go from nothing to 30 gigawatts. The second thing you've got to do when you've made a big statement, and again, this is quite common in China, is having made the statement, you then work out how you're going to back it up. And that's what they did. The first step was you have to appoint somebody. And they appointed two parties to do this. The first being the State Grid Corporation of China. This is 95% of the power distribution in China. It's a huge organization, has over 1.7 million employees. It is extremely, I think fair to say, bureaucratic, but it is also extremely muscular as an organization. And to partner with that, they found a Chinese entrepreneur who had put together the delegation of the Chinese officials to Northern Europe. And they mandated that these two people must build the industry in China. And so following that, they made the appointment of these two people. The next thing you got to do is apply a little bit of grease. And here you have to give full respect to China. There was no biomass policy, incentive policy in place. So they originally put one in place in, I think it was 2006. Since that time, they've tweaked the knob 3 times. They weren't getting the traction that they wanted. Perhaps the incentive structures weren't right. Perhaps the control in the field wasn't right. So we've seen 3 subsequent favorable revisions because they've set a target and they want to meet the target. So they turned up the dial each time. Have we got the financing in place? Do we have the equity coming in place? Are we getting the development? When it wasn't coming at the pace that they needed, they turned up the dial a little bit. That's the grease that the Chinese government officials have been applying. And as I'll explain to you, I think quite successfully. Then what they also did was they had to put a little bit of pressure. They had to put a little bit of muscle behind it. And that was where the State Grid Corporation came into place. In the space of less than 12 months, they had made the decision and appointed parties to build 19 biomass power plants in China. And that was funded almost exclusively by debt provided by State Grid Corporation. If you fast forward to 2010, there's over, I think, approaching 5 billion renminbi, so $800 million US of debt has been applied to getting this industry moving. And then there was equity came into it, and that's where foreign participation got involved. Citibank were a equity lender to this company of about 150 million US dollars of capital was applied. And the reason for it was manifold. The company was a little bit more developed at that time, but what actually was happening was, if you think about it from an equity sponsor's perspective, you had this huge experiment ongoing. They had a proven successful power plant at that point in time, but no others in operation. But you had effectively very low cost debt, and someone was driving to the floor. And so by equity, you're just riding on the top of this huge development project. So the last step was then, okay, you've got to wait and see what happens. So from inception to the first power plant going into operation, commercial operation, was 18 months. And that was a 30 megawatt power plant in Shanxian, which is burning a variety of different crop residue. And then you fast forward literally 12 to 18 months after that, there were 19 biomass power plants on the grid, 410 megawatts of power producing. And fast forward to today, there's over 600 megawatts of power on the grid, over 28 projects, and we're currently working on 15 additional projects at this point in time. So now you have to say, well, let's take a 4-year view. Successful or not successful? What's actually happened with the biomass industry? The good news is the most successful project in China has, since its first commercial operation, been generating an equity IRR of over 80%. So phenomenally successful. There are, at the other end of the spectrum, projects that are losing cash flow. And there's many reasons that we can talk about that: failures in execution, commissioning, installation, perhaps moving too fast. But the range of outcomes was literally vast. But I think everybody would accept an 80% compound equity IRR is not a bad place to be for a project. And there are more than one that are generating that. The successful projects are running at well over 8,000 hours per annum at full load. So you can certainly pick out some great examples here. And this was where the birth of DP Cleantech, the company that I'm representing today, came out of. You have to say, well, would you define what's happened as a success so far or not? If you were to ask the Chinese authorities, absolutely it's a success. Every single one of the major power generating companies in China is now pushing the throttle down to build more projects. Some of our customers in China, they're talking about building 10. There's another one building 5 this year. It's happening. I don't think they'll reach their 30 gigawatt goal, but I think they will make substantial progress. And there's estimated to be about 600 million tons of agricultural waste in China annually. So their capability is there to do it. And they've started to move. They've got the industry from being a concept, they've driven it into something that I would define as fairly substantial as an industry. And then, has it been successful as you look at a Citigroup investment? Well, the answer to that's a little bit more mixed. I think at the outset of this investment, the challenge was, okay, government policy was build me a biomass industry. Financial sponsors want an economic return. So their definition of success may sometimes be a little bit different. And what happened was a restructuring of the organization that took place last year. So the power plant ownership and operation has gone into the state grid fold of the family, and DP Cleantech, which is the solutions, the engineering, the technology, the IP, the installation, the commissioning of power plants, is the company that exists today, which is a 100% foreign-owned enterprise with a substantial footprint both in Europe and in China. And I would say that where we sit today is DP Cleantech basically rode on the back of a tiger. It's a Chinese expression, and the tiger was running, and we clung on. And what have we accumulated and acquired in that process? We've built now in excess of 30 biomass power plants in the last 3 years. Many of those in China, increasingly in Europe, and increasingly in Southeast Asia. And we're here in the US to explore the opportunities here. But we took the IP, which originally, as mentioned, came out of Denmark. I'm really talking about agricultural crop residue. They'd been doing it on a small scale for 20 years. There's projects that exist with a track record for 20 years, but it was a small scale niche industry. We acquired 2 companies in Denmark, both the IP and also the services capability.